Hello and welcome. You're watching In Your Interest. I am Shweta Kothari. India's retail inflation has surged to 3.6% on an annual basis in August of 2024 as against five-year low of 3.54% according to data released just a couple of minutes back. The food inflation, which accounts for around half of the overall CPI basket, accelerated to 5.66% in August from a 13-month low of 5.42% in the previous month, the data has now revealed. The headline inflation number, albeit within the Reserve Bank of India's tolerance range of 2 to 6%, has come in slightly higher in the month of August. What does it really mean for the economy and whether this will dim the chances of a possible rate cut in future? Let's talk about that. Joining us on the show is Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist at Nikore Associates. Mithali, good to have you back on the show. Thank you very much for taking time out. Your first quick reaction on the inflation at 3.65%, slightly above than all the other estimates out there.
Thanks, Shweta, for having me as always, for sharing my analysis on this. So I think one of the charts that you were just showing, before we cut into the screen was around the data over the last year on month inflation. And if you notice, the numbers for August 2023 actually stood at 6.83, whereas the number for August 2024 is sitting at 3.65. Now, if you look, there's a clear declining trend in the annual inflation rates on a month basis over the last year. I would say that this is very good news for the Indian economy because it means that all the efforts that the RBI has been taking in terms of keeping interest rates constant for the last 5 or 6 meetings and discussions and deliberations that the RBI Monetary Policy Committee has been having are now bearing fruit, and we're seeing that inflation is stabilizing. The other factor which is kind of driving this more stable inflation rate is the lower fuel prices that you were also talking about earlier. That, if you see global fuel prices stabilizing a little bit, we see that cut is now going to start passing on to consumers in the prices of goods that are being transported from place to place. So logistics cost comes down. Also, investment in the logistics sector, I think, starting to bear fruit now, where we see that the overall inflation rates are falling. So I
All right.
would not actually read this.
Okay, I want to stick to right now inflation numbers. I will go to petrol and diesel prices in just a bit, but sticking on to food inflation, the number here coming in at 5.66% for the month of August is slightly higher, in fact a lot higher if you look at it in percentage terms, from 5.42% in the previous month to 5.66% in the month of August. What are you making of food inflation? Still continues to be a pain point, not just for the headline inflation number, but also for people at large.
Shweta, actually, I would say that in this quarter, we are doing much better on food inflation than the previous quarter, because you can see that in the previous quarter, we hit a high of almost 9% in June, whereas in the last 1 or 2 months, we've managed to get that under control as well and bring it down to below 6%, which I think is an important target, having below 6% food inflation rate, given the uncertainties that are associated with the different climatic events. Even in this quarter, we have seen some droughts, some floods coming in. And despite that, the food inflation being managed because of the rice and wheat distribution schemes that actually make it easier for a large proportion of the population to at least access basic food grains. So I think there is a good management of the food inflation, but we definitely need to invest in, better mechanisms of food distribution.
Another number that has come out just a couple of minutes back is the India industrial output growth for the month of July at about 4.8%. Is that well within the expectation?
I think, Shweta, that's a little bit lower than what I was personally expecting. I was expecting that to be, a little bit higher in the range of 5.5%, because we've been seeing very good numbers when it comes to manufacturing growth. If you
Okay.
remember, even for the GDP data that came out recently, we saw manufacturing growth coming in at 7%, before that at 10%. So I was actually expecting the IIP to be a little bit higher, in this, in this cycle. But I think it's a little bit lower than my expectation. I was expecting in the range of 5%.
Okay, what played the spoil sport? From what I'm reading, it slowed to 4.8% in July, mainly due to poor show by mining, manufacturing sectors. Could that be because in the month of July we were just coming out of the election euphoria, so perhaps it will start picking up now in the month of August?
Actually, in fact, Shweta, you're very right. This links with the entire macroeconomic scenario in the country in the April to June quarter, because a lot of decision making, is paused during election cycles. A lot of decision making around policies, around approvals, that gets a little bit, stalled. And I do think that we'll see new investment decisions. Also, industrialists will try to defer their investment decision to seeing, okay, where is the political, environment coming to be more stable, with states, which locations, etc. All these choices and decisions are sometimes deferred till, post elections. So that is definitely one reason. But I do feel that there is an overall macroeconomic slowdown that we did witness with the GDP numbers. And I think somewhere we have to look at our own investment strategies, especially in the manufacturing sector, making them more export oriented, making them more climate resilient. These are two important measures we need to start taking in order to boost growth.
Okay, and another, important obviously was the number that came out of US inflation data. That number was important at 2.5% at a 43-month low year on year in the month of August. Are we looking at, and this was lower than expectation, so are we looking at therefore, some sort of realignment on what could come by the way of a Fed rate cut come 18th of September?
Absolutely, Shweta. I think the whole global markets are waiting for the Fed rate cut. And I do think that the RBI will also follow it up with a rate cut, given the lower than expected GDP numbers. It and also a good solid record on inflation management. The conditions are now ripe for the RBI to come and announce a rate cut, even in the Indian interest rates, on the back of reductions in the US interest rates. I do expect the US interest rate cuts to be not so deep. I think they are
What is your
expecting to do it
expectation?
in two phases.
What is your
I think
expectation,
maybe
given there's been a conflict of data here emerging? While the
yes.
jobs data has been extremely disappointing, inflation still continues to inch up. We were looking at, and a lot of economists and obviously the Fed was looking at a possibility of a soft landing. Do you think they have been able to mitigate, the inflationary pressures so far? So it's about time now for a major rate cut. What is your expectation around US rate cut? Will it now be tempered, given that inflation data is not very favorable?
No, I think a 2.5% inflation rate is still very manageable, but I still think they're going to go with their original plan of a soft landing. So maybe a 0.25 to zero point 0.5 basis points in this round, and then another zero point 0.5 or maybe even 1% in, in December. But at least for now, it will be tempered 0.25 to zero point 0.5 basis points. I don't think it'll be more than that.
All right, not more, maybe more than half a percentage point. But what about India? Are we looking at a possibility of a rate cut anytime soon? Will the RBI follow US Fed? Should it wait for US Fed to cut rates? Because if you're looking at India inflation numbers, it is coming well within the range, well below 4%, at least in the last few months. Would you say that 4% is the new normal, below the 4% range is the new normal, or should we wait for a couple of more months to for it to be constant at 4% before RBI starts cutting rate?
I think at this point in time, we can't call below 4% new normal. But at the same time, we have to now consider, is this the right time for the rate cut? And I think conditions are ripe for a rate cut, because at the end of the day, this is the time when we're seeing the GDP numbers, slow down. We can't afford for a GDP slowdown in any case, because at the end of the day, when we look at our overall growth goals, poverty reduction goals, goals around income redistribution, around improving the standard of living for our population, all of that requires macroeconomic growth. And therefore, the conditions with inflation being stable are good for the RBI to announce a rate cut, maybe following, the signals given by the US Fed. But definitely, they have to wait and watch for the US Fed signals.
All right. Well, that's the word coming in as far as inflation data is concerned, and whether RBI will cut interest rates post US Feds. We'll, of course, have to wait for just a couple of more days to figure that out.